I'm here with Sara Marquart from the company, which your first thing you're going to do, Sarah, is you're going to explain to me how you arrived at the company name.
QOA.
Is it
Um,
okay? So I was calling it QOA. It's
yeah,
core.
I think that's also a thing between, like, let's say English native speakers and like, let's say non-English native speakers.
Right.
We did a, like, let's say big survey in the beginning, asking native speakers, how would you pronounce QOA? And
Uh-huh.
the majority said QOA. And I think this kind of like irritation with the name is also a cool thing because it sticks to your mind, right? You will, if you walk down the supermarket alley whatsoever, you think, what is that, right? And so where we came from, we thought about, okay, there's cocoa, there's cocoa. We are not cocoa, we are not cocoa. How about we take this as a kind of like
I
common
see.
root and then alternate it and strike out some letters. And it's kind of like an artsy thing. It's like there's no bigger meaning behind it.
Okay, but no, it makes sense now. I was there. I was thinking it was an acronym, and I was playing kind of word games with a pen and paper, trying to come up with a Q, an O, and an A. I'm thinking quintessential. No, I just couldn't come up with anything. So that's fantastic. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what Core does.
Yeah, so I myself, I'm just one part of the founding team of Core. I founded Core together with my brother Max, who is holding a PhD in mechanical engineering. I myself, I am a food chemist, so studied, like, had a bachelor's in chemistry, then master's in food chemistry. So I'm a big foodie myself. I like eating, I like cooking, I like the transformative process of taking ingredients and then, I don't know, put heat, put salt, spices, whatsoever, and turn them into something delicious. And yeah, I was raised like with parents who like to cook, and like food was always an important piece or part of my life. So yeah, that's why I decided to move on with food chemistry. After my master's, I spent 1 year in biotechnology research in Fraunhofer Institute. It's a research group in Germany, which is, I think, quite prestigious, at least in Germany, before pursuing my PhD together with Nespresso and Nestle in Switzerland in food chemistry. And the question was the elucidation or identification of pathways leading to the unique aroma and taste of coffee. I think it's like a question that is interesting to most of us. Like, you might assume that after 100 years of research in coffee, you might know why coffee is tasting how it does, why coffee is smelling how it does, but it's not the case, actually.
Well, I was just going to say, Sarah, I tried reading some of your white papers, but they were in German and in
Oh,
PDF.
sorry.
Easy to translate. So I thought I'd do my background homework and come up with some clever questions, but it was not to be. So let me ask, just on the coffee side, just to quickly cover off, this is not your first rodeo, as they say in America, because you worked for Atoma Coffee for a time, which we did an interview with about 18 months ago with Jared and Andy there, and they were effectively doing well, I'm going to come on to obviously what you're doing at Coil, but they effectively were doing what you're talking about, but with coffee, right? So you had a go at that for a while, and you were heading up that division, correct?
Exactly. So this was 2019 that they, like, we got in contact. Like, before I joined Atoma, I was working for like the world's largest science museum, the German Museum in Munich, and did an exhibition about coffee called Cosmos Coffee. You can Google that as well. And so there I dealt with all kinds of topics all around coffee, also like where's coffee coming from, biology, farmers, what is the whole supply chain, also the artisanal aspect all around that. And that granted me, as a German, because I mean, what American would ever contact a German, granted me some visibility also in the US. And that's how we got in contact. That's maybe important to understand before I dig deeper into Atomo. And yeah, and then the two founders reached out. And basically, yeah, I joined them on 2019. It was like an amazing ride, almost 2 years now. They have a great team over there making good coffee without the coffee bean. And yeah, I mean, I cannot tell too much about what they're doing because it's also like IP and everything. But if you get a chance and drop by in Seattle or Whole Foods in the US, grab some of their coffees. Like,
no doubt, they were a lot of fun. They were great guys. So you learned a lot I guess from there, and then you got the itch to where did the transfer to cocoa come?
Actually, this dates back to my PhD work mostly, and in my PhD work, I analyzed what kind of Lego stones or building blocks in green coffee translate to what kind of aroma and taste in roasted coffee. So, and basically, cocoa and coffee is not so much distant from each other, right? You have a natural product that you ferment and roast, and you have this transformative process of turning something into something else. And my brother, he asked me early this year, can we not somehow commercialize my PhD research? And I said, yeah, but like this was done for Nestle and this was done on coffee. And it's like, yeah, but what about cocoa? And it's like, yeah, actually, why not, right? And that's actually how it started. We came from the solution side, and then we learned about the environmental issues that cocoa can have, at least mass market cocoa that is produced for mass market products. I'm not speaking about nice single origin cocoa from Venezuela or Ecuador or Colombia. It's like only speaking about that chocolate that ends up in an M&M or so.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So let's just talk about what it is that you do at QOA. So why don't you just explain what it is? What's the objective?
So the objective is to make a sustainable cocoa-free chocolate that is suitable for mass market chocolate applications, for your Snickers coating, for chocolate chips and cereals, for cocoa powder in cakes and yogurts and chocolate drinks, these kind of things. So we really want to satisfy the appetite on chocolate on a global scale with emerging markets like China, Japan, and with that kind of like releasing the pressure on the supply chain of cocoa, because I think like everyone wants to eat chocolate. We have just this one planet and we cannot grow cocoa everywhere. And I think we have maybe one solution to take off the pressure of the supply chain with that.
Right. I mean, there's a number of different directions this conversation can go, but certainly there's and not enough for one conversation. So we might have to have you back another time. But certainly there are a lot of challenges everyone's aware of, ESG challenges in the market, and they span everything from living income issues for farmers to, as you talk about, supply chain. Now, at the moment, as we record this, shipping costs have gone astronomical, and there's simply not enough containers. The backlog at ports, the whole container. We realize now the whole logistics. In fact, forget about containers. The whole logistics network was a kind of a just in time. It worked okay as long as everything kept going. As soon as you stopped things, like they just recently shut down the port in China. And previously to that, we had shutdowns in Brazil and shutdowns in Vietnam and shutdowns in various other places. As soon as you shut down ports, you get backlogs, you get problems, you get an inability to move commodities, and prices have gone absolutely astronomical. Now, that raises another question, which is why are we shipping stuff around the world? And as you said, well, because it grows near the equator, a lot of the commodities that we want grow in certain regions. And so this feeds into a question I wanna come straight into, and what we should probably, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but question I want to come straight into, which is what are the if you're not making this out of cocoa, what are the raw materials you're using? And can we, or how can we solve some of those issues through maybe changing the dynamics of where those materials are located? Is that part of the problem you're trying to solve?
Yeah, so I think what you pointed out is a quite important fact, that we kind of like humans tend to produce something, for example, in the global south, and the nutrients from the soil, from the environment, go into this product in the cocoa bean in that case, and then we transport it into the global north. So we not just have the transport of a delicious cocoa bean from Ghana to Switzerland, but we also have a de facto transport of nutrients from the soil. So we kind of like export nutritious soil in a way to Switzerland. And that's one part of the problem. And we said, okay, let's do a regional approach, that we can make chocolate with ingredients that grow in a certain area with short supply chains, with direct supply chains, and now coming to the ingredients that we are using natural ingredients. That this might sound still opaque, but to name it out quite clearly, for example, pea husk, like from the pea production, oat husk or oats as well, then also pressed cake from the food oil industry, like rapeseed oil. I think in US it's called canola oil, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of food waste produced that had itself or has itself a CO2 carbon footprint. So like, for example, 1 kilogram of food waste has like 2.5 kilograms of CO2 footprint. And by kind of like saving these ingredients, which are perfectly fine for human consumption, it's just not, we didn't come up in the past with processes to valorize these byproducts for human consumption. That's why we have to kind of dispose them. We came up with a fermentation approach, how we can turn them into something that tastes and feels like chocolate. Of course, it's not chocolate, but that's where we are right now.
So this brings on to the nub of the whole thing, which is, so you're making chocolate without chocolate, right? And people might say, well, hold on a second. How that sounds, A, that sounds crazy. B, are you crazy? And
we are.
And well, you know what isn't it? Who is it? Steve Jobs from Apple sort of said here's to the crazy ones, or maybe he quoted it from somebody else, but it was that the here's to the crazy ones was, I think, possibly one of his most famous speeches or adverts that he did at Apple way back in the day. And so it's the crazy people that changed the world, right? But my question is, can you explain to somebody who's scratching their head at the moment, who's saying clearly, like, chocolate tastes like chocolate because it's derived from this raw material. So I'm imagining scientists in a lab with white coats and glasses and pens in their top pocket, with Petri dishes, trying to grow I'm just saying, right? This comes to mind.
That's
maybe
scary.
Not for everybody. And they're going to grow chocolate that they scrape off into a. Tell me that's not how it works. What does this actually look like?
So I think what people really have in mind is, as you said, like lab coats and something growing in the lab. Also, like I think this was reinforced by all this lab grown meat thing that is popping up, like cell culturing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
exactly. And we're not doing that because, like, I also have my gut feeling that I don't want to eat something that was grown in the lab. So what we are basically doing, imagine it more like a beer brewing process. So we get these ingredients. So, for example, a pea husk or potato peel or oats, and we take them in our kitchen, let's say, and we have a fermented there, similar to beer brewing in a way. And we have various yeasts that you know from baking, that you know from beer making as well. And the yeast is nibbling on those ingredients and kind of like pooping out the building blocks that make kind of like part of the aroma and taste of chocolate. And then we roast it in a conventional way, and then we end up having a cocoa powder that has, I mean, you cannot call it cocoa powder, right? But that has the sensory properties of cocoa powder. And to make chocolate, you need not just cocoa powder, as you might be aware, but you also need the butter part, like the lipid, for the snappiness, for the flavor release between 32 to 35 degrees Celsius. So you have this like smooth mouthfeel, right? And we said like, hey, how about we apply this fermentation thing that we are doing, like having yeasts producing our chocolate, also on this part. And we came up with a yeast, a certain yeast that is doing exactly that, also nibbling on these byproducts and kind of like pooping out the cocoa butter. And so now we can have cocoa powder, cocoa butter, and we can make white chocolate, milk chocolate, or dairy-free milk chocolate, and dark chocolate. So all in all, what we are using yeasts that human civilization is using for 5,000 years, that's nibbling on something and producing something else. And for example, when you bake bread, yeast is eating the glucose and making CO2 and ethanol. And in our case, it's not CO2 and ethanol, but it is lipids and flavor compounds. So
But lipids are kind of a fat, right? Because
Exactly.
I'm
Sorry.
reaching the edge of my science capabilities. And can I just say that I can tell you don't work in marketing because you've used the word pooping twice, which you're not allowed to do if you ever put that in your brochure.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
No. Then I was just thinking if I should say secreting, but secreting sounds as
that
scary as
sounds even worse. Yeah,
exactly.
pooping's fine. So, but the question is, so you talked about the cocoa butter replacement. And that was that was actually going to be one of my questions, in that I can kind of almost understand how non-fats, and maybe this is almost certainly just a limitation or a demonstration of my ignorance, but I can understand how sort of like non-fatty um, uh, chemicals and materials are produced. But fats, aren't they? I don't know. Isn't that harder to produce a fat that has the same kind of traits as cocoa butter?
Yeah, and I think that's is really where our, let's say, tech savviness lies in like finding the right yeast strain that is doing exactly that, the cocoa butter with the right fatty acid composition. And yeah, so that's where our research is finding the right yeast, because we only know this baker's yeast, right? But there's like millions of strains of yeast. There's wild strains, mutants, now another name that is like maybe scaring, but it's like as evolution goes on, not just with us humans, but also with yeast, there are also yeasts that change their metabolism and produce, and by screening them, you will end up with a yeast that produces luckily the same cocoa butter as you find it in conventional cocoa. And also there, cocoa from Malaysia has a different cocoa butter than the one from Ghana, than the one from Venezuela. So cocoa butter is also not always cocoa butter. Also some changes where you have it from.
I understand that because it's a fat, it absorbs its surrounding chemicals and odors was one of the bigger issues when you're actually producing organically cocoa. That the butter within those cocoa beans, if they're left, for instance, next to coffee bags, will absorb some of those coffee odors, and so you've got to be careful how that cocoa fat is processed and shipped and maintained. Um, so so okay, so going, how do you go back? Where's the common denominator that you take this to when you're trying to establish, I want to make something that can taste like cocoa, that can act, I guess, like cocoa when you're so because you have to turn it into a chocolate bar or at some point, right? So it has to have the same characteristics in the way that it performs, unless you're going to change the whole manufacturing process. So, and actually, that's a question to ask in a minute, is about the manufacturing process with
Oh yeah,
your
please.
material. But if you're, yeah, where do you take that? Where do you start? Do you start at some kind of DNA level? Do you start? Where do you start in order to understand the flavor characteristics of cocoa? And then, as you say, you're using yeast. And can you just walk us through a little bit of that process? I'm struggling to explain it well, but I think you understand what I'm saying. Like, where do you how do you make this at the beginning?
Yeah, so we started in eating a lot of chocolate. Obviously, we started eating.
That sounds like a good excuse.
No, yeah, but it's like really, we ate, I don't know, like every day, I don't know, 10 bars to get a feeling about what does the chocolate taste like, and we realized that there's not the chocolate taste. We all grew up with having a certain kind of like preference when it comes to chocolate. One might like Cadbury, the other one like Lind, the other one like single origin 70% cocoa. So that was the first realization that actually making chocolate, it's a bit easier than, for example, if we want to make coffee, because we all have a different understanding of how chocolate tastes or different preferences. That was the first thing. So we tasted a lot, human sensory, like we had panelists, we had like experts saying, okay, these are the kind of parameters that you have to nail when you want to have a chocolate taste. Then we correlated these data that we get from sensory experts with analytical data that we get, like gas chromatography. These are all like lab terms now. Liquid chromatography, all these things that we get a kind of like idea what what humans can taste. How can we translate that in a data point? Like how can we connect both? And then with this connection of both, like people could call it machine learning nowadays or whatever you might call it, you will then get an understanding what you need to kind of like mimic, or like that you have to make, or that the yeast has to make it cocoa. So that was the kind of the starting point. We came from eating chocolate, by then breaking it down into actual data points that you have to nail to make it chocolate. And then we like, okay, how can we get those ingredients, those compounds, those aroma, odor, and taste compounds? Where can we get them? How can we get them? And how can we get them? By using yeast, by using fermentation from the byproducts.
So I get, Sarah, the analysis element, and that what you're doing is you're basically doing those lab tests, or those various tests on the chocolate to understand or to map out data points. So you're basically able to take something that I guess feels subjective to us, because I taste it and I go, ooh, that's fruity, ooh, that's acidic, ooh, whatever. And you're able to say, yeah, I can actually represent that as
Exactly.
data points, right?
Exactly.
And I that bit I get. So now you've got a representative data points. You can say this collection of data, a bit like the matrix. You're looking at the numbers. You can say, that's acidic, that's fruit, that's bitter, that's whatever. And you can take all those data points together, and you can say, I understand that now. What I don't get is then what I guess I'm thinking is that then you go to trying to recreate that. And when you say, well, we do is we use yeast and with the fermentation to change it. For me, yeast is Marmite, right? So when I think of yeast, that's the only thing
Marmite.
You're a Marmite lover. Okay,
Yeah.
we're gonna get on well. So
yeah. No, I see where you're heading.
Yeah.
Like the flavor of cocoa and the flavor of chocolate comes most of the flavor comes from the processing, from the fermentation, from the roasting, from the conching. So with our yeast approach, we set the kind of like baseline. We set, so to speak, like the raw fermented cocoa, or cacao, if you want, in that case. Then like we set the baseline pre-roasting. So we kind of like what we do is, with this fermentation approach, we do not yet reproduce roasted cocoa. We still have to roast it, so we have a roaster. And I think what's central to that is the Maillard reaction. It's named after a French chemist. It's Louis Camille Maillard. Like, he found it in 1912 or something like that. It's the reaction of amino acids and carbohydrates. And you find this reaction in any kind of food item. And now coming back to my foodie love. So when you, for example, sizzle a steak, when you make fries, popcorn, coffee roasting, bake a cake, this reaction is taking place everywhere where you have like flavor formation with heat and time. You have this Maillard reaction. And also you have this during the roasting, and now more importantly, during the conching step. And I don't know if you are familiar with conching, or your listeners. Yeah. So you have 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, 72 hours if you like. You have temperature, 50 degrees, 60, 70. So you have all these factors that you need for the Maillard reaction. With now, you have the ingredients produced from the yeast, so to speak, the raw cocoa, and you can process them now like cocoa. Then you have the same reactions taking place, the same Maillard reactions. So it's not like a chemical reaction like in a lab. Just imagine it. It's happening anywhere else, like all the time. So we roast it, we conch it, and then we end up with this flavor. So it's a kind of like process-derived flavor, similar to natural cocoa processing as well.
Okay, so the actual processing isn't that different, or the way that you're bringing those flavors out isn't very different. So where's the secret? Is the secret in the have you got special yeast cultivations that you use, or is that what it is?
Yeah, it is this yeast that we're using, that we profiled. That's the one thing. And also the unique approach that we did with connecting human sensory science, like eating chocolate, with analytical science, and then breaking it down on what kind of building blocks that we need. And that's basically what I was doing for the last 10 years. Like, I researched Maillard chemistry. I come from the chair of Maillard chemistry per se worldwide. So that's kind of my core expertise. And yeah, so I think the trick is the complexity of connecting dots, and then transferring these dots onto finding the right yeast strains, profiling, a lot of profiling work and fermentation work, and finding the right enzymes that can then turn your byproducts into something like a cocoa or cacao in that case. Like it's always like the non-processed part of it.
Okay, got it. So Sarah, why focus just on the bulk cocoa market, the bulk chocolate market? Was that a technical decision, a commercial decision, or some kind of ethical decision?
All of the above. I think first of all, I mean, I love chocolate, right? And I love a good single origin bean to bar chocolate. Like there's nothing like that, right? And I and Max, we don't want to have we want to have cocoa to stay, right? And I think that's why we want to for mass market chocolate, because we also loved our like breakfast cereals when we were a kid with cocoa and chocolate, and we also want to preserve that. But we also think that the cocoa that ends up there is most of the times either not sourced in the right way, or that it's actually a waste that it ends up in there because the actual contribution of the cocoa to the product overall is just so so small, so little, that it's a shame that we waste those resources. So, and then coming to the technical aspect, also you like if you want to mimic a single origin bar from Venezuela or from Indonesia or so, we would have to come up every time with a new process. Like we could do that, but it's just like we would then compete with people that really do amazing work, that source amazing cocoa that is grown in agroforestry, that is sourced directed, and that's not where we want to go, right?
Understood. Talk about the commercial side for a second. How good is your math?
Yeah, I think should be fine.
Okay, so I was trying to do the math and I thought, why am I answering these questions? I'll just pose the questions and do the easy job, and I'll let Sarah do all the hard stuff. So you buy a ton of cocoa, I guess X Works at Farmgate, or maybe it's FOB in Ghana for around 17.50 a ton. And then you've got the shipping costs, which we've already discussed, Ari, and who knows what those are going to be actually going forward. And then you've got the port handling costs and the logistic costs to get them to the factory. And that's when you start to process and add value, assuming that's what you're doing, assuming you're bringing beans across and not semi-finished products and so forth. So you've got all of those are the costs. It's actually not a lot, right? It's actually quite cheap. Except apart from the shipping side of things, it's actually quite cheap.
It is too cheap.
It is too cheap, but that's the price that chocolate companies are paying.
Yes.
How do you plan, if you're going for the bulk cocoa market, have you done your numbers and worked out how you can get that to them at a same price or cheaper? And is that even the direction you're trying to go in?
So I think when you speak of bulk chocolate, like big corporates, they care about sustainability for sure, but what they care more is price, and you need to reach price parity. And that's also like one of the major starting points that we knew that we have to reach that price, because all these startups nowadays that are there, they're doing nice research, cell cultured stuff, going to market maybe 2030, whatever. And we knew, no, if you want to have an impact, we have to meet the price. And so we engaged with a firm in the US that helped us modeling this out, because we wanted to get the numbers right. Because also Max, he's an engineer, I'm a chemist, I'm not an economist, right? And we got help. And for example, a ballpark number, 1 ton, so 1,000 kilograms of oats is 165 euros. So it's the factor 10 cheaper than cocoa. And the supply chain is way shorter. So that plays in our cards that these byproducts are extremely cheap, and oat is not even a byproduct. It's a valuable food item. So I think we have the advantage on our side that the ingredients that we are using are sourced regionally, that are cheaper. But what is the disadvantage on our side, and there's the price driver, that we have to process it with this fermentation part, which is more expensive. But anything else, the roasting, the milling, and the conching is the same with chocolate. So the only difference for us is the fermentation part. And in the end, we end up to be 20% cheaper than bulk chocolate. And this is like when we would produce 2023, like, I don't know, 100 tons or whatever a year, let's say, but we will not end up there, but maybe 2024, something like that. So we don't even have to scale crazy high to reach that price point.
Got you. So you actually touched upon my next question, is beautiful segue, which is talking about scalability. Now, whenever I talk to technologists who have amazing ideas, the secret skeleton in the closet, which they don't ever want to show investors and they're terrified of anybody raising, is scalability. And because something that might work in a lab, it's always the biggest problem is scaling that to make a meaningful impact on the market, or to reach your objectives or your potential, let's say. So we know what the potential market is for bulk cocoa, and it's huge, right? Making this work and demonstrating it in a small scale is one thing. Can this scale to really being, to really being meaningful? How do you, I mean, how do you approach the scalability problems?
Yeah. So also, like, speaking with this firm that we engaged in the US, we already mapped out a kind of like pilot plan with like where the capex would be like 3 million, and we could produce 100. What was it? I would have to ask Max for the exact numbers, but where we can produce sufficient chocolate. However, this has to be proven, obviously. So I think what is easier for our case, other than, for example, cell cultured stuff, we don't need sterility. We don't need these kind of like bioreactors where you have to kind of like get a scale. Our technology is basically kind of like, imagine it as beer brewing. So the hardware costs are easier to match, but of course we also face scaling problems. And I would lie if I would say it is easy. We don't have the expertise. We are not process engineers. I'm a food chemist. Max is an engineer, but yeah, this is going to be a challenge in the future. We have to nail the scaling. This is going to be a challenge, maybe not the biggest, but one of the biggest.
Let's talk about, aligned to this. Let's talk about the big movement in vertical farming, and I want to just ask if your scalability plans are sort of based on using the vertical farming companies out there, or copying their kind of techniques. Is that how you plan to do it, or in fact, it's not really like that at all? Because vertical farms are using, they're actually planting, whereas you're going to be going about it in a different way. But do you see any use for vertical farms in your scalability plans, or that is that just a really a dumb question, a non sequitur question?
No, it's not. So we haven't taken this into account yet. We didn't factor that in, because this would also be a bet on the future. Our numbers that we made up are from like the baseline that we have right now. Traditional farming methods, regional products, and the kind of like availability, supply availability that we have right now.
Hmm. Is the process of making the I want to call it cocoa. What should I call the product?
Call it QOA.
Okay. So we'll call the product core as well, not just the company. So
QOA, yeah, just
core.
call it QOA if you like.
So
Yeah, call it QOA powder, QOA butter, QOA.
you okay? You know Quora, right?
No.
Oh, okay. So Quora Quora makes like a vegetarian alternative to meat. You just, yeah. So
I think I heard of it. Is it based on a mushroom or something like
mushrooms,
that?
yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
It's
right.
you just don't want to have, get a confusion between the two.
Oh
But
yeah.
the core that you're making, how energy intensive is that? Is it how, I mean, if energy costs move strongly in against you, does that change the dynamic significantly for your business model?
Yes, in a way, because fermentation takes some energy. You need the agitation, you need the heating, but also like the roasting and the conching. This applies, but also for the chocolate industry. So we have one part of the equation that could increase, like the fermentation part, but it's not the biggest part. The biggest part is always the roasting.
The roasting,
Yeah.
right?
And I think
Right.
this will kind of affect all of the companies, because usually you will do this with gas. And yeah.
Yeah. How much of the I know when I think we were talking earlier, you mentioned that you may be able to use waste material as well. So you might be buying in like new raw materials, but you might also be able to make use of waste material. Is how much of that do you think is going to go into your final product? What percentage can be effectively upcycled waste?
So the first prototypes that we shipped were 100% based on food waste in a way, so circular. But we also realized that what is now a food waste could be in the future the most expensive ingredient, right? If, like, for example, let's talk about oat husks that we are using. What if we have to make 10 millions of tons of chocolate based on oat husks? Then oat husks might be the most expensive part. So we have to come up with alternative ingredients that might not be food waste. So we have to be flexible in that regard. And that's what we're heavily working on, to be not dependent on the supply chain, neither the ingredients nor the regional availability, so that we can provide a solution for the Philippines where there might not be oat. So why would I produce a chocolate in Germany based on oat and then ship it all around the globe to the Philippines? So we have to come up with solutions there. And that's what we're tackling right now as well. But this is more like, of course, takes some more time.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
One of the touted benefits of cocoa, and this is actually one of the one of the things that I particularly like, and it's pretty much one of the main reasons that I consume a small amount of really nice quality cocoa. Comes from a company up in Scotland called Chocolate Tree. The guy who makes it, Alistair, is amazing, and he sells these wonderful cocoa flakes by the kilo, and they're 85% Belize chocolate, cocoa butter, and a little bit of organic cane sugar. And I mix it in a glass with a small amount of hot water, and I make a shot, which I have in the afternoon. And it's, I mean, the
It sounds
flavors.
amazing. You should do advertising. It's like, oh, I'm gonna have chocolate.
I'm just being honest about how it is, because I give that to people who come around and they think I've added something to it. I say, no, there's no flavoring, there's nothing. And they're like, but this doesn't taste like chocolate. This is amazing. It's so intense and it's fruity. And they're trying to pin me down on what's different. I'm like, no, it's the flavor from the cocoa. But also, and it's just water, right? There's no milk in it. I don't put milk in it or anything else. But also, for me, I'm interested in the cardiovascular benefits. I've been reading the white papers that were produced. I don't know. There was, I think, a year or two ago, a number of new studies that were done on the cardiovascular benefits in particular. So, help in prevention of atherosclerosis, or people who have difficulty in walking because they may have some not neuropathy, but different kinds of cardiovascular disease. And the studies have shown that cocoa was one of the best products in terms of the flavonols and polyphenols that are in there as active ingredients in helping, right, cardiovascular. So I guess I had this question because it sounded a lot more intelligent when we wrote our questions out, but having, listened to what you've said, you're going for the bulk cocoa market. I just wanted to cover it off. You're not going to have those beneficial those benefits from your core product, right? If you're going to be using different materials to make it, you can't inherit those benefits. That's going to be maintained to the high end cocoa. Is that right?
So yeah, exactly. We cannot nail exactly the health benefits of cocoa, but I think what you also already included in your question is that you will find these benefits in high percentage cocoa.
Yes.
And not in like milk chocolate.
Not in a Mars bar.
Exactly, because if you want to eat Mars bars for the health benefits, you would have to eat, I think, 7 kilograms of Mars.
It's possible.
Yeah, it's possible, exactly. But so all research applies pretty much for super high percentage cocoa chocolate. And also there, like I just pulled up the numbers, I think some days ago from the Washington Post, you have to eat like seven average sized chocolate bars. In the US, I think average size is 50 grams. So you have to eat like 350 grams of chocolate a day to really can measure the output. So
I think in the studies, it was like they were giving them 4 intense shots of cocoa a day over a period of 3 months. I'm going to say, I might be wrong on that, but it was a significant, a lot more than I drink.
Yeah,
you know.
but to fairly answer your question and not act like a politician in a way, we, however, have different health benefits. One is that we don't have theobromine, which is caffeine analog, so it's you could call it more child friendly in a way because it's not a neurostimulant. That's one thing. We also do have the ventral meats from oat, like these very health beneficial compounds that are in oat. That's one thing. And we also have flavonoids and antioxidants that stem in one of the ingredients that we use to get this astringent bitter taste, if you want. Like it's actually, I should not disclose it too much, but there's a residue from winemaking. And you might know resveratrol, which is which is addressed for red wine, have very health beneficial. This could be potentially, I don't want to disclose too much, end up in our chocolate as well. And then you have kind of like the health benefits.
Max is cursing you right now from the sidelines.
Yeah, but you no, but you could kind of like imagine having the health benefits of red wine in your chocolate without having the alcohol. But of course, it's not the same as cocoa. It's different. But I think if you want to have the health benefits of cocoa, get this nice Belize 85% cocoa chocolate and indulge it.
Listen, that whole thing about the chemical that I can't pronounce, the resveratrol red wine. I read about that years ago, and I tried drinking several bottles of wine a day. And well, I may have had some health benefits, but the hangover wasn't worth paying the price. So
I can imagine.
So I can contribute to that. But yeah, no, that's very interesting what you say, and presumably you don't have cadmium either, which some cocoa has an issue with. So that's really that's fascinating. We are going to come back another time because we're almost out of time. We're going to come back another time, Sarah, and we're going to talk a little bit about or maybe more about the supply chain side and maybe some of the problems there with the social, because I think that is an important question to ask. I didn't want to get sidetracked. I really wanted to stick with the science today and get a little bit nerdy.
But maybe I can jump in there with just one thing that I want to add, that we engage conservationists. So we engage with people that help us to assess the impact of our invention on the origin countries. Because one thing that I learned from the exhibition that I did, the inventor usually never thinks about the impact that the invention might have in scale. For example, thinking of Nespresso capsules, the inventor didn't think about what aluminum waste could have as a potential outcome. And that's why for us it was important in the very, very beginning to engage with conservationists, with NGOs, to address that. How can we, by not just lowering the pressure on the supply chain, also help the farmers, have the families that like base their living on cocoa, right? So
yeah, that would be lovely to talk about it. And the biggest example of scientists getting that wrong is of course the atomic bomb. And if you ever read Richard P. Feynman's fantastic, he's written a number of books, but his fantastic book, Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, he gives a wonderful portrayal of his involvement in the development of the nuclear bomb. But of course, nobody saw where that was going, and they had their reasons at the time. And so you have, I wouldn't say myopic, but you have a very limited, when you're developing something, you're developing it in a very limited artificial intelligence right now.
Exactly.
Is another example. I'm just touching on one thing. I think we're going to end in a slightly odd way, because I was going to sort of end it there, but I forgot to mention, I just forgot to mention you came out of Y-Combinator.
Oh yeah, right.
Which kind of shocking to me. I'm like, wait a minute. Y-Combinator. So people who don't know, Y-Combinator is an incubator for tech companies. And I'm trying to think of probably who the most famous companies who've come out of, I can't remember, but probably I'm going to take a wild guess and say probably something like PayPal or something came out of that's the kind of company that you expect to come out of Y-Combinator. You came out of Y-Combinator. It is food becoming tech now?
It seems so. But I think the main motivation for us was when we joined in May, that we are Germans, right? We are very structured. So we plan to do things slowly, like hiring the first people end of the year and things like that, right? And Y-Combinator gave us this kind of like US way of thinking to accelerate things, hyper growth, do it quickly. For a demo day that was just like 2 or 3 days ago, we had to have a product, and that's what we had to nail, right? So we had to focus on making a product. That was one thing, and also we're not just anymore like a scrappy German startup somewhere in Munich doing something, but we are the Y-Combinator startup doing the world's first cocoa-free chocolate. Oh, there's the notification. Sorry.
That's okay. Your
So,
next meeting's due.
and to answer your question, if it's becoming tech now, I think food was always tech. If you think of agriculture, farming, like humans tend to use technology to transfer food items and to not overuse the fermentation example, but like beer brewing is per se a technological process. And I think for Y Combinator, there are more and more food tech, biotech startups getting their interest as well. And yeah, I don't know what was their motivation to take us. Maybe they like chocolate, or maybe they like the tech. I don't know.
But you applied to them, right? You applied to them and you said, okay, we want to go through that process. We want to get some of that mentoring, get access to the people involved.
Exactly.
And they took you on. That's really amazing.
Yeah. And it was for me really an honor, because I always wanted to be there, and it's like the kind of like Stanford stamp for us.
It is. It's the gold standard in terms of incubators. So congratulations on that. We really look forward to seeing where you go with this. I hope you'll come back. Don't ignore us, and we'll look to talk to you in the future and see what kind of progress you're getting to. Feel free to send me chocolate. I'll be happy to invest my time into helping you assess your direction strategically by eating as much chocolate as you want to send me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, Sarah.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for having me. That was a blast.
It was a blast.